My name is Alvin Kobulsha, International News Assignment Editor in See Today, and during the Russian presidential election in 2024, I went to Lugansk Oblast of Ukraine, or Luganskaya Narodnaya Respublika, the People's Republic of Luhansk, that according to Russia, currently part of Russian Federation. Back in March 2024, I went to oversee the Russian presidential election as an international election observer from Indonesia under the invitation from the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation. Some of them are academics, some are NGO workers, and some are journalists. Hundreds of international observers came to Russia for this 8th presidential election in Russian land. After everybody arrived in Moscow, we were later invited to oversee all parts of the Russian Federation, including all of the Russian News frontier in the western border that previously belonged to Ukraine and is currently part of Russia claim. This includes Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Where we are going for this election overseeing is wholly decided by the Russia Election Commission, and for those who are going to the new frontier, the trip itself is more challenging. All of us who are going to the new frontier take the trip using military aircraft, indeed from the military airstrip on the Moscow outskirts. For those who go to Luhansk, we need to have a stopover at Rostov-on-Don. It is one of the Russia's biggest city in the southern part of Russia Federation. The main airport in Rostov-on-Don is also still closed due to its proximity to the battle in the front line. Therefore, the only way to land is again in the military airstrip. From Rostov-on-Don, we still have to take a road trip to the immigration checkpoint at the Russian New Frontier. We need to pass the passport check, and once we pass, the full military security and escorts start to be attached once we start overseeing the very first Russian presidential election in Luhansk. Luhansk city itself was already established in the 18th century and later ruled by the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation as the latest aftermath of the Russian-Ukraine conflict on the border since 2014 after the Russian-sponsored referendum in 2022. And when I arrived in Luhansk at night, the locals told us that in Luhansk, the curfew at night is still implemented due to the security measures. Therefore, the city ambience is still serene and desolate. The cold, windy weather, which is still in the middle of the winter-spring transition, also brought tranquility to the city. The presidential election in Russia was held from 15 to 17 March 2024. This is the first time Russia has used multiple-day voting since the 2020 referendum on constitutional reform. No less than 112.5 million electorates will cast their vote around Russia, and in the 4 new frontier, there will be 4.5 potential voters. It is also the first presidential election to use online voting, and the option will be available in 27 Russian regions and Crimea, which Moscow seized from Kiev in 2014. During the first day of election observation in Luhansk, I went to the biggest gymnasium in Luhansk as the first poll station I oversee. When I arrived, the local journalists were already crowding the venue. I am also busy taking footage during this overseeing, and I could say that there is no limitation for us, the international election observer, to taking any picture, to record any footage, and to have the interview with the locals, with the electorates during the election in Russia. So, I can capture the whole process, from the people entering and taking the ballot, to going to the ballot booth and casting their ballot in the ballot box. And one of the most interesting part when I overseeing the election process in the polling station, that I also compare it with the situation of the election and the situation in the polling station in Indonesia when we also held an election a month before. Is the ballot box in Russia is totally transparent. So when I asked my interpreter and also asked the local why the ballot box is transparent, they also call it that it is part and it is one way to show its transparency. The second polling station I went to is to the public school that is not really far from the first polling station in the main gym. And there I can see all of the election trinkets better because there is not so much a local journalist compassing us as an international election observer. In this station, I can see the information posters for the voters to cast their votes, including the short bios of the presidential candidates. Many of my colleagues, both journalists and non-journalists, before I go to Russia, that this Russian presidential election is only about Vladimir Putin. But actually, when I do some research, I also realize, but actually this is the 8th, I already mentioned it before, this is the 8th Russian presidential election since its separation from the Soviet Union. And actually for this Russian presidential election in 2024, there are 4 candidates competing for the presidential seat. The incumbent President Putin is listed as an independent candidate and is seeking a 5th term in the office. Others on the ballot were Nikolai Kharitonov of the Communist Party, Leonid Slutsky of the Nationalist Liberal Democratic Party, and Vladislav Davankov of the New People Party. Kharitonov himself ran against Putin in 2004, finishing a distant second. After noon, I continue to oversee the polling station at the residential flat complex. There are 2 voting polls in the venue, since the electorate reached the number of more than 1,000. This is the biggest poll station I observed during the election. Actually, one of the biggest hindrances to doing the coverage is not the limitation to cover, but my capacity to be covered by the local media too. So in addition to interviewing people, I am often in a situation where I should provide interviews to the local journalists as well. Therefore, the time is too limited to have an abundance of interviewees.
Коллеги ходили по домам вот перед выборами, ходили, чтобы рассказать людям о голосовании, о кандидатах в президенты. И, знаете, такого не было, говорили, что люди не будут двери открывать. Все открывали двери, все с удовольствием слушали, все задавали вопросы, всем это было интересно.
The last poll station I visited was at the Agricultural University in Lugansk. Here I realized that the multi-day election is also useful in providing more time for those who were busy on the weekday, since the election was held from Friday to Sunday. The time window to vote has also been adjusted, so it will be more friendly for students and professors. This election observance actually not only in the Lugansk capital city, because us, the international news observers, also went to the outskirts. And for those international observers who has worked in Lugansk, we then transported to 2 other smaller cities called Antransit and Krasnodon. Along the way, I now understand how crucial this region is to the world grain when I see the vast land of the farm. During the trip, I also met a Russian military truck that went back and forth from the front line where the battle was still bloody. And when we arrived at Transit, actually it's so fortunate to us that we can also experiencing the Maslenitsa festival or pancake festival. The festival is indeed festive and full of joy. This annual festive is celebrated annually during the early days of warmer spring, leaving the dark, cold winter behind. Children are playing theater, dancing and singing to celebrate the long-awaited day. And in Antransit, the poll station is really near with the Maslenitsa festival. And it is one way from the local community to attract the potential voter to cast their ballot. No wonder, at the end of the election, the voter turnout in Lugansk for the Russian presidential election reached 87.12%, surpassing the national turnout, which is only 77.49%.
Ну, я думаю, для меня, как и для всех жителей нашего города, главная мотивация – это стабильность, это уверенность в завтрашнем дне. Сегодня очень значимый день, ну и вчерашний день голосования тоже был, и вот завтра тоже мы будем все голосовать. Это, ну, как бы очень значимо для всей нашей территории, потому что это и будущее наших детей, это и наше будущее. И мы все горды тем, что вот впервые за долгое время мы участвуем в выборах президента Российской Федерации. Я хочу сказать, что ну, для нас это действительно праздник. Это действительно праздник, и мы рады, что сегодня мы все являемся участниками этого грандиозного события.
And when I came back home to Indonesia, several main questions that people always ask me, whether it's in office or in a home, is how's actually the situation in Lugansk right now? Is it still dangerous there? And did I hear any sound of explosion or shelling? Fortunately for me, I didn't need to wear my helmet or bulletproof Kevlar vest, which was ready at any time at our vehicle. All of precautionary equipment is just sitting quietly in the trunk. I also didn't see any military patrol in the city, other than those who were assigned to protect us since the checkpoint border. Of course, I don't know if some of them are patrolling in disguise, but I didn't feel any imminent threat during the election overseeing. During the trip in Lugansk, I also tried to observe and acknowledge any remnants or footprints of the battle and a conflict that happened in the city. I found it in the obsolete building, the unnatural broken wall on the flat facade, or the unbuzzing ambience of the city. I also went to the Gorky Park near the Central, and my interpreter said that this lovely park also once became a battleground. I can feel it since the park is still so solemn, but I hope it is just because of the weather and me becoming over-dramatized. I also tried to probe and ask out the locals about the situation there, but the deepest answer that I can get, since the conflict broke out in 2014, many of the Lugansk residents evacuate themselves or took refuge. Some of them took refuge in Ukrainian land, some of them taking refuge to Russian soil, and some of them even taking refuge to other parts in the world. But after the Russian-sponsored referendum in 2022, those evacuees, those refugees are gradually come back to Lugansk, since for them, Lugansk is their soil of soul. We still don't know when and how conflict between Russia and Ukraine will reach its conclusion. But through the interaction and kindness with Luhansk people during the journey, there are two things that they are desired the most in the end of this conflict, which are peace and stability in the future.